What is going on today, guys? Hope you're doing well. It is another video from Hazmat Trucker, and today I just wanted to talk about the topic of burnout and how I think largely it is a self-inflicted wound. Now, what do I mean by that? So in this video, I'm going to break down what I think and what I define as burnout, and then how you can solve that and kind of go through how I solved that work-life balance, as they call it. When I mean burnout, I mean, generally speaking, just working too much to the point where you feel like you haven't gotten a chance to take a breath. And even if you get a day off, you're barely able to recharge. You're always tired. Even when you get good sleep, you still wake up tired. And the days just seem to kind of blur together. Now, I'm not going to sit here and say that there's not a point in time where you're required to work a lot of hours, because at the end of the day, 40 hours a week is not going to cut it if you want to get ahead in life financially. It's just not. In recent years, very, very few people have worked 40 hours a week and have gotten ahead unless they put in some sort of adequate level of suffering to get to that place where they could only work 40 hours a week and still have a good life financially. For example, if you did your hard work up front and you went to college and you studied for engineering, and then you got an engineering job, and then you're paid a decent amount, as engineers are, even for just a 40-hour work week, that's what I'm talking about. Engineering majors often have to go through 5 years of college because their workload with the math, the physics, all of the science that goes into getting their engineering degree, they have to spend hours a night just on homework for basically 5 years straight. And then they get a decent job. They put their time up front. They put in the hard effort up front. And I'll be doing a separate video on, the 40-hour work week. But speaking for the rest of us, myself included, who did not do that and did not put up the work up front and just do the hard thing first and then have an easy life, and we're convinced that we could just somehow have an easy path to wealth. The 40-hour work week does not get you there. It just doesn't. There will be a point in time where you have to put in a lot of hours, and that could be 50, 60, even up to 70 hours a week, or even 80 hours a week. I've had 80-hour work weeks before, even in trucking, mainly in the oil field. And for me specifically, I've mentioned this before, but it's worth mentioning again, I found myself in that place because I did unwise things financially. I spent more than I had. I blew my money on cars throughout my 20s. Never had an adequate amount in savings or even anything in retirement to speak of. And I kept living paycheck to paycheck. And as a result, Murphy's Law happened. What can go wrong will go wrong. And I had an emergency, couldn't pay for it, and had to go into debt as a result. And it forced me to go into the oil field to work a hell of a lot more than I ever wanted to. Not even just in the oil field, but for the next subsequent 3 years, in order to fix that mistake that I made, financially speaking, to catch up, to dig myself out of the hole. After that, once I had gotten into the oil field and then gone into fuel hauling for a regional company and then for pilot, I spent the next 3 years averaging pretty close to 70 hours a week for the next 3 years, most of which was at night. And after I had done that at pilot, which was entering my third year of doing nothing but 65, 70-hour weeks consistently, I had finally gotten myself in the place financially to where I didn't need to necessarily do it every week. The fear of getting myself back into that financial hole kept me on that hedonic treadmill, as it were. And as I hit the 1 year mark at pilot, I just kind of realized, man, I have to slow down at a certain point, because when I was at pilot, for the year and 3 or so months that I was there, I probably worked about 12 6-day weeks. And then even on this 5-day weeks, I was still averaging well above 60 hours a week. I would come in early, when my slip seat was off on both days and work 14-hour days then, and then max out my 12 hours on the days that he was working. Even when I went to days at Pilot shortly before I came to Gemini Motor Transport, I didn't have a slip seat. And so they were having me work 13 or 14-hour days pretty regularly. And despite me trying to get adequate sleep, and I was getting 7-8 hours of sleep, despite working out, on top of that on a consistent basis, and despite spending as much time with my family as I could, I still was not getting a catch up on just feeling exhausted. I was starting to get burnt out, as I had described it earlier, to where I felt like I could never catch up. I could never be fully rested, even on the days that I had off. How I solved it was, for me, I started reaching out and making those connections to other drivers here at Gemini Motor Transport. And fortunately, at the time, they also had an opening, and put my best foot forward, and I was hired here. And that's significant because at the time, it was a $5.50 an hour raise coming to Gemini versus at Pilot. At Pilot, I was at $30.50 an hour. And here at Gemini Motor Transport, I started out at $36 an hour. So that $5.50 an hour raise meant that I was getting paid the same amount of money per week working 53 hours at Gemini Motor Transport as I was working 60 hours a week at Pilot. Point being, if you're starting to get burnt out to the point where you no longer feel like you have a life and it's just kind of blurring, your work days are blurring with your days off, if you even have them, then and you're no longer in the financial place where you're required to do that, as I was, then it's time to solve that. And again, I did it by coming to a different company where I was paid more and I didn't have to work as much to make the same amount of money. That's an option. You can get different certifications in order to make yourself a more valuable employee, so you can get a higher pay rate. You can just tell your boss too, hey, look, I've been working too much. I need to dial it back. As far as how much I'm working, because it's starting to affect me. So, I need to work, instead of 60 hours, I need to work 55, or if it's 55, I need to work 50 hours a week. Whatever gets you back down to a reasonable level to where you're not starting to feel that stress constantly build. You can also get different certifications and going into a completely different field. Especially if you're in the financial place to do so, and you save your money and you minimize your expenses on a monthly budget, yeah, I would say, if you want to do something else that isn't as labor intensive and you can make it happen financially, go for it. Several years ago, when I was in a different field, I met several different people who had been in that field for 20 plus years. And in that field, you could work practically as much overtime as you wanted. And they described how they had worked 70, 80 hours a week, basically for 10, 15, 20 years. And ultimately they regretted it, because when you're working that much for that long, you can't have a social life. You can't have a functioning relationship with a spouse, let alone your kids. And ultimately for them, they described those relationships falling apart as a result of how much they had worked. You're supposed to work to live, not live to work. So I would encourage you guys, if you're starting to hit that point where you've put in long, hard hours for years on end, and you're starting to feel it, not just physically with your stress, but you're also starting to feel it mentally, and especially those important relationships are starting to take a hit, take your foot off the gas. Go find a happy medium between feeling like you're stressed out financially and with the amount of hours that you work, and working too much to the point where you're starting to be stressed out from working too much. And those relationships that I had mentioned are starting to feel it as well. Do whatever it takes to find that balance. Because at the end of the day, you want to be the tortoise, not the hare. Life is a marathon. It's not a sprint. And there's always going to be the opportunity to work. So with that being said, if you found this video helpful, or if you disagree with me, put it in the comment section down below. And if you'd like to see more, please like and subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one. God bless.